Welcome to Unlocked. I'm Dr. Joel Swakowski. In this show, we explore how truth comes to life through real stories and real people. Today, I'm joined once again by John Lenhart. We are going to be covering Mobbed, the mobbing series, part 4. We're going to recap when it starts. If you've been along for the ride, you know what we're getting into. So let's just get right in. All right. Hey, John, how you doing?
Great. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm excited. We are in the Mob series, part 4. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to today. But before we get into it, could you give us a little recap on where we're at in the story?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say this. If the people watching this video have not seen Mobbed Part 3, click off of this episode and go
Right,
watch Mob Part 3. We will still be here waiting for you when you get back. So
right.
I think there was a lot of stuff that happened in 2008, and it feeds right into this episode. And so if you haven't seen Mob Part 3, go ahead and do that. So let me give the recap of everything here. So in 2001, a woman claiming to be a prophetess leaves the big church and says it needs to split 7 ways so the spirit can flow in the valley. The pastor of a charismatic church takes her in and attempts to split the big church by attacking the son of the big church pastor for having an inappropriate relationship. The man whom the son replaced as the youth pastor in the big church became the pastor of a small church known as San Damiano. Now, in Mobbed Part 1, we covered my time at San Damiano and how the pastor's mentor, whom we called the other John, bullied me by calling me a cult leader, not meeting with me, and not allowing me to be heard. The mentee confronted the pastor to resolve the conflict, and when he wouldn't, I chose to leave so that I wasn't a distraction. In Mob Part 2, we covered 2007 when Modeling God was published. By the end of the year, I sold about 200 books and had gotten fired from my job. As 2008 began, I was trying to find a job somewhere in the United States, and I was looking forward to being off the hook with God. I was feeling the existential burden of being the only person with a non-contradictory model for God, and I felt I did my best job getting this out, and now that it didn't go anywhere, I could go back to corporate life. In Mobbed Part 3, we covered the first 5 months of 2008 when the charismatic church pastor began bullying me to cover for him messing up with his accusation of the big church pastor's son.
Yeah.
Nothing he writes makes sense, but I find out he's working with the San Damiano pastor and the other John, who
Yeah.
created the template for attacking me. Call me a cult leader, don't meet with me, and don't allow me to be heard. I'm hoping something clicks with this charismatic pastor and he runs with this information like the Apostle Paul so that I can be off the hook.
Yeah. Man, I, re- I remember the couple really big reveals in Mob Part 3. So again, yeah, go and listen to it if you haven't seen it, because that completely changed the narrative. I mean, in the moment, I had this epiphany and this realization, and I remember being with you during these times, but still not remembering the really important details of what was going on behind the scenes. And
Right. And
you know,
that was because Andrew, the mentee,
yeah,
and this woman were really the 2 people that I confided in the most. They were a part of this from the beginning, and by this time, I was also starting to confide in Simon.
right,
But you really weren't involved in all the things that were going on, and really, part of the reason we're doing this is people don't know that the big church pastor was supporting me. We read emails in Mob Part 3 where the big church pastor is actually supporting me against the
right.
charismatic church pastor. Not a lot of people even knew that happened. And I
No,
think this episode is also the same way, where there's a bunch of things that happened that people don't realize. So in June, the woman who's a part of the inner circle with the mentee, she's got a sister in Minnesota who's a social worker, and that sister's working with an organization that's like a halfway house for people getting out of jail and being there. So she hooks me up with her sister, and they'd like someone to come in and meet with these guys once a week and run a little group like I'd been running, with the man group. So It was 290 miles one way from
Oh,
Green
wow.
Bay to Minnesota. And so I was driving there every week in June and driving back. So I drive there in the middle of the day, get there around 4 or 5 o'clock, spend 2.5 hours, and then drive home.
You're staying
So I was
overnight. You're just like a what?
not
That's
staying
a,
overnight.
all right. That's a
So I
quite
was
the
doing
commitment.
that. I did that for 4 weeks and things were going really good. And then I get a call from that organization saying they no longer want me to be a part of it because the charismatic pastor called them and basically threatened or bullied them that if they continued talking to me, he was going to tell everybody that they were using a guy who was a cult leader in this organization. So that all came to an end.
So the slander and persecution is spreading.
And he's going out of his way. He's going
Yeah.
out of his way now to track me down, whatever I'm doing. I'm out of state helping people. He wants to end that
Yeah.
too. Modeling God's Wills went on the internet in June. And so this is going to become important in the next, this episode and the next 2 episodes. Because if you remember in the previous episode, point number 8 to the charismatic pastor's uh, review on Amazon was that I said you could end marriages if they weren't profitable. That was not mentioned in Modeling God.
Right.
And I said in Modeling God, we will look in Modeling God's Wills about when it's right and wrong to end a marriage. Well, that information is in Modeling God's Wills. And
Hmm.
now that information was up and around in June.
Okay.
So in July, what happens is this woman, because her husband went to the charismatic church, she also was a part of the group when I mentioned in the last episode that your dad and I said a couple people, she was one of them, had met with the charismatic pastor.
Right.
So now she wants to email the charismatic pastor because she's a little upset that this thing that she organized with her sister got killed. And so she wanted to write to the charismatic pastor. So
And this is
they
the same woman that you're confiding with and working with, like
right on the inner
friends
circle in a sense.
with. Yeah. Okay.
And so she already met with him, but now she writes him an email. And she had a meeting with him. And then she follows up with these emails. I'm going to read from some of these emails. So she has a meeting with him and she says in her email, one point from our meeting keeps replaying in my mind. You said that Modeling God was 80 to 90% true, but not true enough. Yet it appears that you believe somehow this statistic still allows you and the woman claiming to be a prophetess to publicly state that modeling God is a significant false teaching. So this must be a standard you're willing to hold yourself to. So she says, if one of your sermons is only 80 to 90% true, how do you want to be confronted? So basically, during her meeting, the charismatic pastor said, modeling God's only 80 to 90% true. Well, that's not what was said in that review at all. So now
No.
he's already started to back down a little bit.
Hmm.
So the charismatic pastor responds this way. You may do as I did. Basically, you may do to me as I did with Lenhart by running your concerns by me in writing, in email, or in person, and giving me a chance to address them.
What is he rewriting history?
So she writes back and says, you didn't do
Right.
that. Well, what are you saying? Like in his head, he goes, you could treat me the same way I treated Lenhart by confronting me at first. He didn't confront me at first.
No.
And by meeting face to face, he wouldn't meet with me.
Mm-mm.
So then she goes, you didn't do that. And then she even wrote, I know for a fact that 3 people, and she wrote believers in parentheses, told you John should be considered a brother and therefore treated as such. So this is where I think the mobbing comes in, because I think he was enjoying distracting people from his screw up with the big church pastor's son. And I don't think he was really the initiator of this. These 2 other people behind the scenes were. And so now he's feeling emboldened to do this. And all of a sudden he gets caught in a lie. He's just making things up to just kind of go along. He wants to be confronted the same way he confronted me, but he didn't do that.
Right.
And she said, because she knew people in that church, I know that 3 people came up to you and said you should talk to John, and you won't do that. So now we're just realizing he's kind of a mess. And one of the things that happened is he called up um, the publisher of Mall God and said, "You need to drop this book." And the publisher said to him, "You need to meet with John." And he hung up on the publisher.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah. So the thing is that the publisher was like, "Hey, you are you coming back to the show again this year? Like, it looks like your book has got legs
Yeah.
and people are talking about it. Do you want to come to the show?" The show was in Orlando. So I went to the show. Now, I got two interesting stories I want to tell about this.
So is this the book show, like the
Yes, the
convention?
International Christian Retailing Show, like I went to the year before in
Yeah. Okay.
Atlanta. This year it was in Orlando. So the thing is that um, the Orlando is where the Holy Land experience is. If you saw the movie Religulous, it's like a Disney World, but it's based on Jerusalem. And there's a guy there who plays Jesus, and Bill Maher interviewed the Jesus guy, real nice guy and everything. Well, they had a booth, the Holy Land experience, and they had like Roman centurions walking around, and they had like Jesus, the guy playing Jesus was walking around the floor. Now, they were in the corner, and the 3 rows near the corner, that end, is what people refer to as Jesus junk. So there's a bunch of people selling, um,
Like
like
keychains and
whistles
stuff.
and keychains
Yeah.
and pencils and pens with Jesus stuff on it. And it was so funny standing in that aisle and watching Jesus walk up the aisle and these people selling stuff like in the temple, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then look up and see Jesus and then they had to have this
And like
reaction.
hiding all their stickers while he walks by.
So the thing is the second day, so Jesus is walking all around, and I'll tell another story about Jesus walking around, but he's walking all around. And the second day of the show, there's an announcement at the start of the show before they're about to open the floor. They go, we're 5 minutes away from opening the floor. And let us remind you that people should stay in their booth. Caricatures and people should not be roaming the aisles. And it was like they should have just said, and that means you, Jesus.
Yeah.
I think enough
Right.
people complained that Jesus was walking the aisles and causing them to go, wow, what am I doing with my life? But that first day, I met him and I had modeling God. And so I shook his hand. I talked to him, super nice, compassionate guy. Absolutely. I said, would you hold Molly God and give me a thumbs up so I could take a picture? It took me 3 attempts. I was laughing so hard, but I have a picture of Jesus, the guy playing Jesus,
Yeah.
holding up Molly God and giving me a thumbs up. So
Nice.
that was really awesome. But in Modeling God's Wills, I talk about the doctrine of marriage, the doctrine of divorce, and the doctrine of putting away. In the Bible, there's a doctrine for divorce, and then there's a doctrine for putting away. And the thing is that Deuteronomy 24 says a man could divorce a woman for basically any cause and remarry, and she could remarry. So this idea that divorce is a sin, not really sure where that comes from. The thing is there's also this thing of putting away. So divorce is when you're married to a believer, you no longer want to be married, but both of you are believers and you stay in the community. Putting away is when one of the 2 people is no longer a believer. And then the person who's still a believer announces to the community, this person's no longer a believer, and puts them away. The thing is all these Bibles written after the ASV, which is like what, 1901,
1901.
all these Bibles written after 1901 substitute in divorce for putting away.
Right.
The King James, which was the 1611 and 1618, use it correctly, except for there's one verse in Matthew where they get the 2 words backwards. And then the ASV's got them all correctly. All these other books don't. And it creates an interesting situation that happened. So I was walking down the aisle, and the Moody Bible had a huge booth. And this guy, I'm walking along their booth, and this guy comes out with this new Bible. It was a brand new Bible that they were doing. It was the Geneva Bible. It was a reissue of the Geneva Bible, John Calvin's Geneva
Yeah.
Bible. And so they're trying to talk to me about the Geneva Bible. This guy is, and he's pushing at me. And I look at him, I go, "You don't want to do this. Don't do this. You don't want to do this." And that made him go, "Oh, I definitely
Yeah,
want to
I
do
do.
here."
Yeah.
And two guys behind him turn around that are working the booth with him, and they come running behind him like, "This is going to be great." So he's standing there. There's two people behind him. They're like, "This is going to be fun." And I take the Geneva Bible and I go to Mark 10, 11 and 12. Mark 10, chapter 10, verses 11 and 12. And I look at it, and sure enough, they're using the word divorce in there. So I said, "Look, I got a question for you." And I hand the Bible back to him. I said, "Could you explain this Mark 10, 11 and 12 to me?" I said, verse 11 says that if a man divorces his wife and marries another, he commits adultery. Deuteronomy 24 says he can divorce. And we're still under the law here. Jesus hasn't died yet. So Jesus is saying that doing the law results in sin in your Bible. Mark 10:12 says that if a woman divorces a man and marries another, she commits adultery. Women weren't allowed to divorce men. They could put them away, but they couldn't divorce men. So verse 12 is Jesus doesn't know the law. So can you explain to me why the Jesus in your book is saying that doing the law results in sin and he doesn't know the law? Do you think that Jesus is the Son of God? The two guys behind him turn and skedaddle. They do not want to be a part of this
They
discussion
just bailed,
anymore. And he's looking down at it and he's looking at me, and I go, "I told you didn't want to do this." And
Yeah.
I just walked away. So that's part of what happened in this modeling God's wills is there's a lot of damage being done because God's will is church and marriage. And the doctrine we have for marriage and the doctrine we have for divorce and putting away is wrong. And it's actually limiting God's will. And so that was the point of one of the big points of modeling God's will. Well, that was now published. People were seeing that. And I was blatantly just addressing that with people.
Yeah. So this Mark 10, 11, and 12. So basically what the translations after the ASV and the King James are doing is proving that Jesus doesn't know the law, or he's changing the law.
Or the law results in sin.
Okay.
Because it actually is putting away. If a man
Yeah.
puts away a believing wife and marries another, God still considers them married. If a woman puts away a believing man, and marries another, God still considers them married. If you put away an unbeliever, yeah, you're fine. But divorce doesn't make any sense, and it's contradictory there.
Right.
And that's causing a lot of damage in the church. So that's where I was hinting at that in modeling God, that we're going to deal with that. It's a more complicated issue than we could deal with. Now in modeling God's wills, I spell it all out. I address every verse in the Bible that talks about divorce and that talks about putting away. Every verse. There's not a lot of verses. It's not like, oh, this is really complicated. It's not complicated.
Right.
And it's very straightforward if you understand the doctrine of marriage. So that was a big part of what I was doing. Now, by this time, the mentee was out of that young adult ministry, the crossing. He was still kind of going to the church, but he was out of that. The pastor's son was in the clear. They didn't really need the mentee to take over that thing, and he kind of went out of it. And what happened was there was a guy who liked to talk about God's will and why the church isn't seeing signs and wonders. And he had hired Simon and the mentee for some temporary painting jobs. And they would spend the day talking about modeling God to the sky. So the
Okay.
mentee and Simon are sitting there talking about modeling God to this painter guy. And they gave him a copy. They gave him, well, it's published by now. They gave him a book, Modeling God. He read it, and then he immediately read it again. And he was like, "This is amazing. This makes
Yeah.
total sense." So, he grew up in the big church, but he currently went to San Damiano, the
Okay.
little church. And in fact, he was related through marriage to people on the staff of the big church.
All right.
So when he was told everything that we're talking about right now, the mentee, Andrew, knew all this. And Simon did too by then. So these two, like you said, you didn't know this whole story, but those are two of the guys, along with this woman, who knew the whole story.
Yeah.
So they tell him the whole story. And he's like, "There's no way this happened. there's no way this happened.
Right.
And there's no way that the San Damiano pastor and the big church pastor know this information and refuses to use it to help people because it was helping him.
Yeah.
So in fact, he got mad at Simon and he said, I've known you for the past 2 years and you've been interacting with me during that time because you use them for a lot of painting jobs. And you didn't tell me about this book. I'm mad at you. So this is a guy we have a new character now. And I knew this guy was different from everybody else by his first request is he said, I want to meet with John. Like, wow, this is amazing. So this is a guy who read Mind God twice. He's mad that he goes to San Damiano and he's got relatives that are in staff in the big church. And he's like, this is helping my life. You guys have known about this, didn't tell me. And now you're telling me that San Damiano and the big pastor know about this and they're not doing anything?
Yeah.
I want to meet John.
Right.
So he comes up to meet me, humble guy. He was a high school graduate. He talks kind of slow. So everybody can sit there and think, oh, this guy he's not too smart, but he was sharp. And in fact, I nicknamed him the knife after the first discussion we had because he would ask a question. I would answer it. And in my head, I'd go, oh, I know he's going to ask this question, then this question, then this question. He would ask the last question.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, you just knifed through. I told him, you're knifing through this whole discussion to get the last question. So in my head, I was like, this guy's the knife. I told everybody, this guy's the knife. This guy just gets to everything at the end. So he's an extremely likable guy. And everybody who knows this guy, nobody doesn't like this guy. So he could talk to anybody. We met again and he asked me my side of the story. So I got to the second time, tell him my side of the story. And then he asked me what I was willing to do to sort this whole thing out. I said, I'll do anything. I'll meet with people. I will do anything. And it was then that I realized he was acting in the role of a judge, like in the Bible.
Yeah.
So I called him the judge. So that's my name for him at this point is he's the judge. Just like, in the Bible, before they had kings, they had judges. Moses was the first judge. God worked through Moses. And then the second judge was Joshua. And then after the book of Joshua is the book of Judges.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. And so I felt like, man, this was the answer to prayer. God brought me a judge.
Yeah.
And so the judge went to meet with the San Damiano pastor, and the San Damiano pastor shared a lot of very personal things with him. And the judge ended up pastoring the pastor San Damiano.
Yeah.
And I think he kind of realized what a bad guy he had been. And he's a real nice, compassionate guy, San Damiano pastor.
Yeah.
So he told the judge, I'm done pastoring. And then he said, you know what? I think I'm going to go on sabbatical. And then he went away for a month.
Yeah.
So what happened was the judge began his process. So this is the process that he followed. Because basically he's like, okay, I've talked to John. All he's done is help people. And he hasn't hurt anybody. And he talks to the pastor, and the pastor says, well, he hurt some people. Who? Well, these people. And then the pastor goes away for a month after he talks to the judge. So the judge goes, and I'll do it this way with letters. The judge goes up to person A and says, hey, Pastor San Damiano says John hurt you. How did he hurt you? Well, he didn't hurt me. But you said no. I said that he hurt B and C to the pastor San Damiano. Judge's like, okay, thank you. Judge calls up B or goes to meet with B and says, hey, I heard that John Lenhart hurt you. How did he hurt you? Oh, no. He didn't hurt me. I didn't say he hurt me. He hurt D and E. So the judge is like, okay, pastor goes to C. I heard John Lenhart hurt you. Well, no. He didn't hurt me. He hurt A and D. Well, I talked to A. He didn't hurt A. In fact, he said he hurt you. Well, no, he hurt D. So the judge started this process in July, the slow and steady process of finding out who did I hurt in this whole process.
Yeah.
Now notice there's some symbolism here. There's a pattern. Like, what do we call this when all these people, A, B, C, the pastor, are telling everybody I hurt somebody, but they're not the one who was hurt?
Well, this is a direct result of mobbing, right?
It's another, well, unless it's the same people. Now, remember, the people mobbing me through the charismatic pastor
Yeah.
is the San Damiano pastor and the other John. If the
Yeah.
other John's behind this, then yeah, it's mobbing from him. If there's another person doing all of this, we got dual mobbing
Yeah. There's just
situation here.
and everybody feels like they're off the hook for whatever it is
Right.
they're saying and doing.
But they're still telling everybody, oh yeah, John hurt so and so. Well, did he? I talked to that person. He did. Well, so this is running in the background.
Yeah.
Just know that, all the way through 2008, the judge takes his time, tracks down people, and he's looking for the person that I hurt. That's what's happening this whole time through this process.
Oh man. So yeah, ultimately, because like we're trying to get to the like one of the themes that happens throughout this story is people are just really quick to defend the people who are after you as if John must have done something to get these
Right.
people after him. And that's
Right.
really, it's like, so the judge is doing a great job of like, well, if that's the case, let's find that person and we can handle it the right way.
Right.
It's just, yeah, it's taking, I mean, it also goes to show how much damage was happening with how long of a process this took them. There was a lot of people talking.
There were people had said there's 1,000 people in this valley
Yeah.
who knows what's going on at one point is what they said. So
Yeah,
there were a lot of people talking.
man.
And so he was taking his time working through all of that.
So
Now,
what was I mean, yeah, I mean, you keep going. I'm just wondering what the judge's findings were after this whole thing.
yeah, well, we'll find out, right? Because this is, like I said, this is going on in the background the entire
Yeah.
time. And he was very meticulous that way. So he was really awesome. Now, in August, there was the rebroadcast of that Bob Dutko show. Remember we
Oh, yeah.
talked about. And so this is where I end up meeting Ed Mabry,
Yep.
Dave Tobby, a bunch of other people from Michigan. But this is how I end up meeting Ed Mabry. Is Ed Mabry, they rebroadcast it in Michigan, Detroit, but they also had a Sacramento station. And so Ed Mabry hears that. He writes me. He's a staunch Calvinist, and he's like, how can God know things at the end of the Bible in such detail if it hasn't already happened yet? And he and I just wrote back and forth from this time on. But this is kind of where I met Ed Mabry. This is where I met Dave Tobby, two really, really smart guys. Ed's a perceiver teacher and Dave's a server teacher. So very, very smart guys. But this is where I met them, just to mark that moment.
Yeah.
So remember, I'm trying to get a job. I'm trying to get out of the valley. That's my whole goal right here. And the thing is that I had worked for Procter and Gamble on Liquid Tide. We talked about that. I ended up getting a job at Dial because of my Liquid Tide job. I worked on Liquid Purex, and then I made Ultra Purex and Ultra Trend, and I took Dial from the number 13 selling detergent Purex to the number 2 selling behind Tide. So I had this background where I'd done these things, and I have this expertise, and that's why I got paid so much and everything. Well, one of the companies that was looking for basically a lab director, so it would have been a lot lower job, but above the formulating that I did, was a company called Hewish in Utah.
Okay.
And Hewish made these detergents, and I believe at this time they had just acquired Whisk from Lever Brothers. So Hewish now was like, hey, we want to get into this game. Whisk had been that was one of the detergents I beat out when I was at Johnson Wax. I'm sorry, at Dial. So now what happens is there's this company that has this high level detergent. I send my resume and we start having, I have a phone interview where it's like, hey, I'm the guy who took Purex from number 13 to number 2 and beat out Whisk. And now you have Whisk and these other detergents. I could do the same thing. And they're like, this is amazing. This is great. So September 8th, I flew to Hewish.
Okay.
And so I fly to Hewish in Utah. I do the interview. This is the absolutely the easiest job for me to get in the world. And again, they're not going to pay me $150,000 like I was making working for Red, but they're still going to pay me a great salary, probably close to like 100,000. And I can go move to Utah,
Get out of the valley.
get
Yeah.
out of the valley, and do my thing.
Yeah.
Interview. I'm clearly the right person for the job. Clearly clear all the hurdles. There was a woman who would have been my boss. We got along great. I'm ecstatic. I'm ecstatic about this. Okay. So then what happens, and I'm going to jump ahead in this Hewish thing, is that they said they would get back to me, with an offer or a decline. I never hear from them.
Really?
I don't hear a decline. I don't hear anything. I call them, they won't respond. I write them, they won't respond. And it was just like absolutely ghosted out of all this stuff.
Oh, wow.
And the thing is in talking to certain people, the charismatic pastor putting, this refutation on the internet. This is 2008. Again, what did we know about the internet? I didn't know much about how this all works. But here they are. They're going to hire this executive. They look into my background. There's this controversy. And then I'm going to Utah where all these Mormons are. And again, I'm trying to get, and I even told them about, hey, I'm trying to start over and all this stuff. And they were like, this is great. This is fine. That I lost this job, a job I clearly should have gotten, a
Yeah.
job I should have been out, absolutely out of the valley in September. So what's ironic about that is while that was happening in September, the judge has an issue with his wife.
Okay.
His wife is having a mental breakdown. And so he calls, and his wife's family has family that go to the big church. So they all call, the big church, and the big church sends over this woman and an associate pastor to pray for his wife. So they come over to pray for his wife. And after they're all done with that, there's a copy of Modeling God sitting on the end table, or the end table. And the judge says to the associate pastor, who he's known really well, says, hey, would you read this book, Modeling God, and tell me what you think about it? And the associate pastor, now this is September, right? The associate pastor goes, oh no, I can't read that. The big church pastor says, that book's heretical. And if I read it, I will get deceived.
Oh. So wait a minute. It wasn't the big church pastor. I mean, what's the last we heard of him at this point? You guys were getting along, right?
Right. So if you think about it, and again, the judge's in-laws were there dealing, like it was the in-laws, I think, that pretty much called his in-laws, her parents, that called that church there. So they all hear this. So now it's just going to spread it even more.
Yep.
But the thing is that there's two things wrong with this. Number one is you're an associate pastor at this big church and you can't read a book without it deceiving you. Like,
Yeah.
why are you afraid this book is going to deceive you?
Right. And I mean, for the big church pastor to speak that over him too, it doesn't say much for his trust in.
Well, we'll get to that in a second, but the associate said, I can't read that book. I'll end up deceived. Now, maybe that's a rationalization to get out. I don't want to read it. I don't want to be anywhere near this, because he was a real compassionate guy. But if you think about it, he's saying, I, as the associate pastor of this big church, can't read that book because I'm afraid I'll get deceived. So you don't have the doctrine, the training.
Right.
To,
what do you do with the Bible? Right. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than following God.
So we're going to get to that. You know, in the last episode, we talked about that, where we said, if you can't interpret modeling God, how are you going to interpret the Bible? And we
Yeah.
also talked about, like, you have to know how to interpret something before you read the Bible. The first step isn't read the Bible.
Right.
And the second step is figure out what it means. The first step is know how to interpret text, then read the Bible, then figure it out. But it's starting to show these people don't have, and it's starting to show there's a reputation. Kid, we are 14 months. Yeah, about 14 months after Modeling God was first published,
Okay.
so far in the story. And so word has gotten around that, yeah, people read this book and they start believing it. And if you read it, you'll start believing it too. Well, and it's wrong. Oh, yeah, it's wrong. Well, then I can't read it. I'll get deceived.
Yeah. Oh,
You know, there was a there was a guy at San Damiano whose wife read Modeling God. And she came up to me and she said, you know, this book makes me feel really uncomfortable. And I said, really? I said, does it give you the same feeling as when you're having affairs on your husband, which she was? And she goes, no. And I go, does it give you the same feeling as when you're smoking pot, which she was? She goes, no. I said, does it give you the same feeling as when you're gambling all the money away and that's why you guys are in debt? She goes, no. I go, well, can I use you as a testimonial for the book? Like,
right.
like if this gives you a
Clearly a
different
different.
feeling than when you're sitting, that's the
Right.
best testimonial I can get.
Right.
And so
Man.
that's the thing, is people, like, this book makes you feel uncomfortable. And they go, well, it's wrong and bad. That feeling's wrong and bad. No, it's uncomfortable. Maybe
Right.
it's growth. No, it's wrong and bad. So you have an associate pastor who says that, but you've hit on the big issue here, which is, what's happening here? Is the associate pastor making this up? Because I want to believe the big pastor, and the reason why I want to believe the pastor of the big church is he said, what the charismatic pastor is doing to you is wrong. We all know from Matthew 18, you're supposed to go to a person if you have any issue. The big church pastor said that to me, what, in like March?
Yeah.
6 months
Yep.
later, the associate pastor in his church is saying the big church pastor is not doing
What he
what he
said.
said he would do.
Yeah.
So I always try to assume positive intent. So my thought is I want to believe the big church pastor is right. I want to
Yeah.
give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't want to instantly, charge him with a crime. So this associate pastor's lying. Maybe someone got to him. Or the big church pastor is really saying this. And if he's saying this,
Yeah.
6 months is all it took for him. Did he get, his son got free and clear? They know his son's no longer in any problem. They moved the mentee out of taking over that, and they were like, let's forget the past, let's go forward, and let's just be glad that the charismatic pastors found somebody else to beat up. And oh, by the way, we'll go kick them too. I mean, what's
That's
going on
tragic.
here?
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, the whole other side of this too. Honestly, one of the things I find funny, it's a little like a little side topic here again about the whole idea that when you read Modeling God, you believe it. It's like, wouldn't, like, if there was a book that was possible, wouldn't it be the Bible? Right?
Yeah, good point.
Or it's but my point is, not even the Bible has that power, but Modeling God does, where if you read it, you're going to believe it. It's like,
Right,
oh, it's just people are just coming up with whatever they can to just get out from under the tension of this whole thing and the responsibility. It's
right.
awful.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So now where I'm at in this story right now is I had a golden ticket to leave the valley. Absolutely. Like, if anybody were to say to me, John, what's the one job you could get in the whole world? It's, I could be in charge of some formulators and formulate myself a detergent that is not number one and number two in the market at a company, and they would absolutely want to hire me
Yeah.
because I've done exactly what they're telling me. We want to do this. I have done that. Here's the proof. Here's all this. I knew I was getting
Yeah.
this job, and and they're a professional company. They never responded. I flew out to Utah, stayed overnight, went to dinners, met all the people. This was a managerial role, not really an executive role. My boss would be an executive. It's a step down for me, but this is a no-brainer. This
Right.
is absolutely, there's no reason I shouldn't get this job other than somebody's writing stuff about me on the internet.
Yeah. Somehow they saw your background, or, at this point, or they saw what was being said about you.
Or the other option here is God didn't want me to leave the valley, which I didn't want to consider that
Not at the
option
time,
at
yeah.
all. Not at the time. No, it's like, how does this door close? There's no way in the world this door should have closed. So
And then for
that
them to just
closes.
for them to ghost you too is just like, I
And I
mean,
tell that story all the time to people in the industry, and they can't believe that part's true.
right.
There's no way this company never gave you reason, never followed up, never nothing. Yes, there is. Repeated emails, repeated phone calls,
Yeah, that's pretty
nothing.
severe. All right. Yeah. Well,
So
yeah.
you look at where I'm at here in September 2008. I'm desperately trying to get out of the valley, and my golden ticket is slammed shut. And the one guy I thought was behind me, this big church pastor, is either talking about me or his associate is, maybe I can do this big church pastor a favor by showing him your associate out there doing everything you said not to do. So in the next episode, I am going to write the big church pastor, and it's going to be an exchange that I don't think anybody knows about this exchange.
So up to this point, so you're gonna reach out to the past, because at this point you still want to be merciful, right? And that's kind of
Yep.
where we ended the last episode too, where it's like you talk about assuming positive intent. Where are you at with the charismatic pastor now? Where it's like at the end of the last episode, it was like he's being duped. Like all we don't know, he might be being duped, right?
Right. And I'm hoping something will click. Remember, it's like he's
Right.
logical. I'm hoping something will click. But this woman talks to him and nothing's clicking.
Right.
In fact, he's saying, he's literally lying now.
So with
Like what he
him at
said,
this,
treat me the way I treated John. You didn't treat John that way.
right.
Okay, now he is just making stuff up.
So the assuming positive intent is becoming a lot more difficult with him, if at all, right?
Right.
Like the guy doesn't seem to have positive intent anymore. And that you're still but taking that same approach with the big church pastor. And
Right.
assume
And so the thing is I don't know if he's got a rogue pastor or if the big church pastor is now happy his son's in the clear. And boy, oh boy, if we can make John a scapegoat and point everything at him and we go forward, good for us. Let's do that. So now, I'm starting to feel like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. These two pastors had an issue over the big pastor's son, and I became the scapegoat for both of them, is what this is starting to look like. But I'm going to confront the big church pastor, and I'm going to give him every opportunity to show me he's not a hypocrite.
yeah, and this is the stuff. So now I'm starting to remember this type of stuff, back in 2008, and I don't want to spoil anything, but this stuff is just incredible. And it is, I mean, I'm glad you're sharing all of it, and it is a little bit more complicated than what people think, because I think
Well,
there
remember
is,
the judge, the complication in this story is the judge is connected now.
right.
So the judge is going to the San Damiano church, and he's confronted that pastor, and that pastor's kind of feeling guilty and takes a month off. And now he's sorting through that church that he goes to. He actually goes to that church, and he's starting to realize, and this is objective. Like I'm waiting for this judge, this objective person. Here's this objective person, reads Mom and God twice and goes, oh, the big church in San Damiano should be helping people with this information. No, they're not.
Right.
This can't be happening. So John must have done something wrong. Here's what I did. Then John must be not willing to talk to these people. John will do it. John's trying to talk to these people. Well, I can make this happen. And he's got relatives that are in staff at the big church, and his wife and their family go to the big church. So now you got a guy that everybody likes who's really acting as judge, who's going to sort this thing out. And so that's where I think you probably heard a lot more of it, because if you remember when the judge started joining the group, there was a lot of discussions in front where he would talk to you, he talked to everybody,
Yeah.
like he wanted to find out what really was going on. So
Yeah.
now everybody in our group's starting to hear what's going on. Yeah, meet this guy, he's the judge, and he's done this, he's done that, he's doing this, he's figuring this out, where's he at? And we would get these updates.
Yeah.
Oh, he talked to D&E, and they said it's F and G. He talked to F and G. They
Mhm.
said it's C and B, and we went, no, it's not. Oh, then it's H. And he's just taking his time plugging through that, and we would all get updates. So I think this might be where you're starting to, for you relative to the story, you might be starting to realize, okay, wait, I'm now remembering this, and this is where things were a lot more open about what was going on, with everything. And I was just trying to get this in somebody's lap so that I could go take a job. But now I'm starting to think I'm never going to get a job, because if this company doesn't hire me, nobody's going to hire me.
Yeah, it's right. And, so many years later now, looking back on it, it's easy to just kind of put this simple narrative to the whole thing based on how it concluded and what were the big parts of the story. But what I'm realizing now is there's a really pivotal stuff going on behind the scenes that, you're right, most people don't know about. Even people who think they know the story or who were close to the story don't know a lot of the details. And it's really, really great to have this get all flushed out. And I think people are going to keep getting help from this story. So I appreciate you
Yeah,
sharing.
and the way I do, the judge is kind of a key, is when people say they know the story, and I say, well, and I'll say the judge's name, and everybody knows the judge. And I'm like, so what do you think of his role in this, and what happened, da, 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 da? What do you mean?
Yeah, it kind
And
of
then
goes.
what do you think of the associate pastor coming to his house and saying, the big church pastor said, this book's heretical? What do you mean? I'm like, yeah, you don't know the story.
No,
You
no.
know what happens in 2009, but there's a whole bunch of things that happened in 2008 that are just how we got to 2009.
Yeah, because there's some really big stuff that's still coming that kind of overshadows the entire story,
Yep.
right?
Yep. You
So
forget all this stuff.
yeah. And this is all the stuff that laid the framework. Because one of the patterns I'm starting to see is all these people who are coming against you or speaking against you are learning tactics from each other on how to do this. Because there's really just 2 or 3 different strategies from the deceivers that they're, well, this worked for you, I'll do this too then. Or this worked for you, I'll do this too.
Yeah. And the next installment, I'm going to talk about how dangerous that is to people's salvation. In fact, I'll talk in the next episode about how the charismatic pastor already may have blasphemed the Holy Spirit. And it was an incident I talked about in the previous episode 3. So I don't know if people caught it or not, but we're going to talk about that in the next episode.
All right. Well, can't wait. Thank you again, John. Well, yeah,
Thank
we'll have
you.
we'll have part 5 recorded and published soon. So yeah, have a great day.
Thank you, man. Take care.
Thank you. All right. Mob part 4, really laying out more of this groundwork, right? What a really intriguing narrative. It's been incredible. Each one has been awesome. I'm also just really looking forward to next episode as well. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Let's unpack some of the doctrine that I can see in this story. One of the things that I loved is John's approach to the charismatic pastor, and now we're even seeing with the big church pastor, to assume positive intent, to, be merciful to these men who are seeming to be part of the abuse he's experiencing. And one of the things that it reminded me of, especially when John talks about the charismatic pastor, maybe he'll be like Paul the apostle, right? Paul the Apostle was this awful enemy of Christians who, converts, has this awakening on the road to Damascus, and then becomes the greatest missionary the church has ever seen. So for John to assume, or at least even consider, that this same idea could be applied to the charismatic pastor is pretty excellent of him. So what it reminded me of, though, is a sermon my brother Tim, who's a senior pastor of a church himself, what he preached, he's been sharing his own story, and it's quite the intriguing story of his own. He, as a teenager, was very involved in gang life. This is back in like the 90s. Gangs were becoming really big here in Wisconsin. And yeah, he joined up in one. And the sermon he preached and what he related to his story is this passion he had for the gang life, this passion he had for his fellow gang members, this passion he had for everything that it meant to be a part of this gang, this family that him and his friends had created or joined. And he related it to the Apostle Paul. And he talked about how this passion he had came from a good place. And this passion he had was all about brotherhood, about loyalty, about, being there and backing people up and, standing up for yourself. And all these are like good qualities on the surface. But when they're misdirected, or when the intent behind them, or the direction this passion is going is in a wrong place, it becomes really destructive. And that's what the gang life did for my brother. But then that's what it did with Paul the Apostle, right? When he was still Saul, this passion he had for what was right, for the law, was being used in the wrong way. But once he got redirected, once he got that butt kicking on the road to Damascus, and he is given this new insight over who Jesus is and how Jesus is the promised one, the Messiah, that passion in Paul didn't leave. The passion didn't need to be reignited. That passion was still there. It was just redirected. And we can see this, Paul himself even talks about how, in First Timothy, when he's writing Timothy, he talks about, in the first chapter, he talks about himself being a blasphemer, a persecutor, and he says about himself that he obtained mercy because he did these things ignorantly in unbelief, essentially meaning he didn't know he was in unbelief, which the implication there is when Paul was doing what he was doing to Christians and arresting them and chasing them down and holding the coats of the people who were stoning Stephen, Paul thought what he was doing, or Saul thought what he was doing was right. He was very passionate about this. So it's incredible to see how when we have truth, that passion can be directed in the right way. And that's what happened to my brother Tim. That's what happened to Paul. And we'll see, that's whether or not, I think it's incredible that John is considering at this point that, these passionate men who are coming after him, maybe what they just need is to be redirected towards the truth. And, that passion can be used for good. So where's your passion? And what's your passion being used for? Now, another thing I wanted to touch on was divorce and putting away. Honestly, check out Modeling God's Wills. It'd be worth your time to definitely to understand marriage and divorce and putting away. In and of itself, there's a lot in that book, but those are worth the price for sure. I'll definitely put a link in the description of this episode if you want to go to modelinggod.com and you can purchase a copy for yourself. But one of the simple things I'll just talk about right now is really emphasizing that divorce and putting away are two separate concepts. Those being lumped together as if they're the same has caused a lot of damage. Divorce and putting away are not the same. Now, one of the things John mentioned is, he in passing kind of said, I wonder where it came from or why people think divorce is a sin. especially when Deuteronomy 24, the law, a book in the Torah, teaches about how divorce is in the law, how divorce is lawful. Of course, when it's done the right way. But one of the things that is pretty simple to address right now that I think may have done some damage, and it does come down to men getting their hands on the Word of God. The more a human, gets their hands on the Word of God, the worse the Word of God becomes. We don't make God's Word better. We make it worse. We just need to learn how to interpret it the right way, according to the way God meant for us to interpret it. But there's a verse in Malachi chapter 2, verse 16, that has been used time and time again to talk about divorce as if it's a sin. And it's the verse, you may not know the passage I'm talking about, but you've probably heard this before. And it starts by saying this: "For the Lord God of Israel says that he hates divorce." The verse continues on. Unfortunately, this is a mistranslation. The word there in Hebrew is not the word that should be translated into divorce. And this is one of the newer translations that has it this way. I think this is pulling off of the New King James Version. But if you look at the King James Version and also the American Standard Version 1901, it says this: "For the Lord God, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away." Well, there you go. So those are two separate concepts people don't know. And how often are people using this verse, this mistranslation of a verse that God hates divorce, as their evidence, their proof, their support for divorce being a sin? Now, there's a lot of other stuff that people have done a disservice in the words of Jesus from Mark 10, 11, and 12. Like John said, there's also some other verses in the Gospels that the majority of the translations just get flat out wrong. So if you want help understanding this stuff, like I said, Modeling God's Wills will help you. But at the very least, just make sure you're looking at the original languages. And if you're really doing word studies with English translations, you're going to have to go down to the original language at some point. But my recommendation would be to use the American Standard 1901. You may not be able to find like a hard copy or paperback or leather bound anymore these days, but all of this stuff is available online for you. And the King James Version tends to be pretty accurate too in its translation from the original language into English. Anyways, the last thing I wanted to say: if you're in a situation where you needed the truth, how would you want someone to give it to you? Think of the time when you were given the truth. Assuming some of you listening, watching, have come to the knowledge of the truth and it's impacted your lives in very positive ways. Do you remember that person or persons who was pivotal in your life in giving you that truth? Don't you want that more often, right? So how would you want somebody to do that if you were in another situation like that today? And now that you do have truth, how are you delivering it to others? Have you taken responsibility over giving to others what you have been given? That's it for today on Unlocked. I'm Dr. Joel Swakowski. You can find John on Instagram, on X, on Facebook. Instagram and X in particular are the handles at Modeling God. You can also find them at modelinggod.com. Go check out those resources if you want to reach out to him. I'm sure he'd be happy to get a message from you. But yeah, keep learning. Thanks for listening. Keep seeking truth. Keep living it out. See you next time.